Welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He's the author of the book 50 Shades of True Crime. No other than Mr. Doug Fifer. Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Dog, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. Again, name's Doug Fifer. I was born in Homer, Alaska, which is a small town in south of Anchorage, where I grew up, and then I moved to Anchorage, and then started in law enforcement in 1996. Did 25 years in that profession, retired, and wrote the book 50 Shades of True Crime.
Mr. Doug Pfeiffer, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world. How did you decide to blend true crime with themes like sex, drugs, and kink?
Yeah, throughout my career with friends, family, or just the community, everybody would ask you, what's the most outrageous case you ever worked? Just common chit chat. And so I talk about murders, robberies, things like that, and they'd be like, "What's really cool or strange? Anything sexual?" So I would tell some of these stories that I worked, these criminal cases that were sexual in nature, and boy, everybody just dug in deeper and deeper with questions. They wanted to know more. They wanted to know why people acted like that. So I thought to myself, after a few years of this, when I retire, I'm going to write a book about it. So it's a real unique twist on true crime. It's all sexual deviant cases, the worst of the worst on the planet. Most of the cases I worked personally in Alaska. A few others I worked with other departments to gain knowledge of those cases. But really interesting read. Again, it's a twist on true crime. It won't be your normal book that you're about law enforcement or criminal cases. It's really extreme.
Extreme indeed, people. Were there particular real life cases that influenced the stories in the book?
Yeah, really what I did is over my 25-year career, I took the worst of the worst. The book starts off with a chapter called Name That Crime. It's kind of a fun icebreaker for the readers. I'll show them either a booking photo of a suspect, maybe a piece of evidence. I'll provide them three or four state statutes on the crimes that could have been committed. You get to kind of play along and guess as to what crime that individual or that piece of evidence is related to. You'll then read the case, study the story, and find out at the end if you were right, close, or totally wrong.
Well, congratulations for binding all those cases, mister. And how did you approach writing about such dark and sensitive topics responsibly?
Yeah, I think as a retired cop working it just comes second nature, and you see it every day, you work it every day. So it's not as extreme as what most people might think it is. So fairly easy for me to write. Again, when you've worked each and every case for weeks on end, it's kind of cemented in your memory. So the book was pretty quick to write. I wrote it over a summer, a couple months. Publishing obviously takes a lot longer, but it was fairly easy to write, and I had a lot of fun with it because I just went through with these cases that I remembered, and it's really the bird's eye view from the cop. You get every detail, every strange behavior. You get it all. I didn't keep anything out of it.
Yes, indeed. What do you think draws people to the intersection of true crime and taboo subjects?
Yeah, I kind of talk about it in the book. I really think that although, sex is biological, we all know that. I think power is really the key here. So I talk about it in the book that these suspects, when I interviewed them, they were driven by power, holding control over the individual or whatever they did. And that really is what got them off. Sex is biological, no doubt, but they always reverted back to the power, the control over the individual, which I found fascinating. What drives them from a human brain standpoint? Hard to tell. I wish I knew, could solve all the crimes. It's pretty unique to individuals, but that power key is pretty evident.
Was there a story or case in the book that was especially disturbing or difficult for you to write?
Yeah, some of them. I mean, the book really covers a lot. It covers bestiality, which is sex with animals. That's tough for people who have their own pets and love animals. Necrophilia, that's a tough one for your listeners. That's sex with dead bodies, corpses. That one's always
Mhm.
tough for me. Uh, we had a serial killer that had admitted, actually a couple serial killers, to having sex with corpses post mortem after the death, and that was to control the individual even more. That's how they got off. I've worked a case with a medical examiner's office where an employee was actually having sex with bodies that were in the morgue. And if you research it, it tends to be that, right? Individuals like that seek out mortuaries, medical examiners, things like that, where they're around their fetish or their paraphilia to have sex with these dead bodies. Always disturbing. I can never figure it out why an individual would do that, how they would get off with something like that. But that's one that always fascinated me.
How did you balance storytelling with respecting real life victims and their experiences?
Yeah, in the book, I'm very cognizant of families, victims. Alaska is a very small community. You have about 750,000 people statewide, a massive area, but low population. So, what I do, if the suspect was arrested and it's public information, I'll put their name in there, their booking photo, all the information. I tend, if it's family related and they're not quite known, then I leave, I use different names in there. And I tell the reader that as well to protect families and identities. Such a small community with social media and contacts that I don't want the families to be, victimized again by people contacting them or anything like that. So I'm really careful. But if it's public information, it's right in the book and you get to see the individual and what they committed.
Mr. Doug, how do you think societal views on sex and drugs influence criminal behavior?
Well, I think there's certainly a subset of it that focuses on sex and criminal behavior, and I think is the primary driver. So, take for instance necrophilia, homicide. That's where the individual intends to kill the person for the purpose of having sex post mortem after they're dead. Uh, that's what they like. That's what they do. We've had people like that in Alaska, unfortunately, that we've arrested. So that the sex actually drives the criminality. Sexual assaults, certainly, they prey upon victims. Most criminality is driven for some other reason. The sex category is quite unique. And again, always revert back to that power issue where they're seeking power over the individual to control them. That's where the sex comes in.
So, Mr. Doug, did you writing 50 Shades of True Crime, sorry, change your view on crime, king culture, or human psychology?
It didn't really, just because I was so immersed in that culture, criminal behavior for 25 years. So it almost becomes second nature. I will say for the readers, their minds will be blown. It will change their perspective on criminality in their community. I referenced that this could be your boss, your next door neighbor, your best friend. You don't really know what happens behind closed doors. You might think you do, but you really don't. After you read this book, it'll be eye-opening on what occurs in everyday communities across America and the world.
Again, Mr. Dog, thank you so much for sharing your expertise to the world. Are there common misconceptions about the Killer King cases that you tried to address in your book?
Yeah, at the end of the book, I have a chapter. It's called Teachable Tidbits. And my whole premise for the book is that most people think if they download porn or if they have a weird sexual position that they like, then that's extreme and it's an extreme fetish or kink. Really, it's not. Once you read this book, you'll realize that you're probably perfectly normal in your sex life. But the last chapter is called Teachable Tidbits. And those are things that I saw in my career working cases that are perfectly legal. They may be a little strange to some, they may be an odd fetish, but I put those cases at the end. The readers can either incorporate it into their sex lives or they don't have to. So it's more of a fun chapter because the book is so serious and extreme up to that point. I like to give the readers a little bit let down at the end, and they can read some of the funny things that they might incorporate in their sex life or they may not.
How does your book differ from other true crime works that cover similar topics?
Well, the reason why I wrote it is because there's lots of books on serial killers, on criminals, robberies that, lifelong robbers that rob banks. I really wanted to come out with something different with my first book. So it focuses on the real extreme sexual deviance in our community. Most in Alaska, we have our unfair share in Alaska, unfortunately, but I wanted to focus on that. So these criminal cases are going to be purely sexual driven, each and every one of them. Now, there are different sexual fetishes and paraphernalias throughout, but really that sexual fetish dominates these cases and the crimes. And so that's what the reader gets. You're gonna read about the strangest of the strange in society.
How do you hope readers react to the stories? Shock, understanding, or a reflection?
Well, I think you could throw all three of them in. If you get into bestiality, necrophilia, something like that, understanding I think is impossible. But there's some minor fetishes that I work into the book as well that readers may accept. That they may already participate in some of them, they may not. These were things that initially shocked me, but again, after 25 years, nothing really shocks you anymore. So I think it's a good read. I think each individual will take it differently. And from contacts on my website, I think some are really shocked, some aren't that surprised, and some are just completely blown away about what's in the book and how this could possibly happen in everyday society.
Mr. Dog, what are the biggest myths about connection between alternative lifestyles and crime?
Well, I don't think there's any real connections on alternative lifestyles and crime. I think crime's its own bucket that goes across all social norms and whatever you have. So I think that doesn't matter. I think it's up to the individual if they choose to engage in whatever crime they may. Typically, in my line of work, interviewing suspects afterwards, they knew it was wrong and they did it anyway. So I think that's a human behavior. It doesn't really matter who, what you believe in or think about. I think that's could be driven internally, but I see it all across the spectrum. So I don't think it really classifies into one area.
Was there a particular case you almost did not include because it was too graphic or controversial?
Well, in this book, I leave out sexual assaults on with victims because I think that's an area that you don't want to touch a lot on. I think pedophilia is another paraphilia that probably hands off, and unfortunately, that's pervasive in our society. So I leave those out. While there's victims in this book, I certainly don't out any victims in here. I keep it very private, with names or changing things that I tell the readers about. Everything else is in it, but those are two areas that I didn't write about. They're very difficult to read. And again, I don't ever want to, have a victim be victimized again by them being in a book. So those are two areas I certainly left out.
Mr. Dog, as an author, what would be your short term and long term goals?
Well, after doing law enforcement for so long, I love writing. I always have. I mean, cops write reports constantly, so you have to be pretty good. And if you're not, you're going to get good throughout your career, because really, you're writing a book about a case, and you go to court from start to finish to prosecute and to convict a criminal. So you got to be very detailed. You got to put all the facts in there. So writing comes naturally for cops, I think. One, I really enjoy it. Two, I've got a ton of great stories from being a cop for so long. So I think the first book is to break out with something different. It's been extremely popular, so I've been very lucky with the first book as an author. And I think the second book in there and moving on will be more about traditional crime. I've worked a lot with serial killers, so I think the next book will transition to a book about Alaska serial killers, and I'll kind of document those cases throughout. But that's what will come next.
Good luck to your goals, Mr. Dog, and looking forward for your success. And what would be your advice for those people out there who want to write their own book?
Well, if you want to write your own book, I'll give you some advice. The writing of the book is actually the easiest part. You can do that. Finding a publisher to publish your book. When I first thought it would be easy, that was the most difficult part for me. I was in contact with many, many publishers who would take my book, they would look it over, review it, and they would come back and they'd be like, well, it's a little extreme. So let's take this out, and this out. What I told them is I want the book to be authentic from a cop's viewpoint. So all the facts are in there. I'm not going to change anything. It's got to be real life. And so they would pass me over. And it was about 6 publishers before I found one that would actually publish my book. And I know there's a lot of self-publishing. You can do it on Amazon, and that's a fine route. But if you're going to go to the route of a publisher, it's not a slam dunk. It takes a ton of work. So I wrote the book in a couple months. It took me about 18 months to find a publisher that would actually publish it.
Thank you for your advice, Mr. Dog. And people, stop procrastinating. If you have the passion to write, and share to the world, just like Mr. Doug Fifer. What ethical guidelines did you set for yourself when writing about real life crimes involving sex and drugs?
I think the guidelines I have, we talked about it earlier, are keeping names of families, victims, things like that out of the book that shouldn't be there, because I certainly didn't want to interfere with anybody's private life by writing this book. Again, if it's public and we have a booking photo and a name, I put it in there because it's public information already. So ethically, I was very careful. Cops are put in patrol and on duty to protect society. So even post my career, I still follow those values to protect society. So I would never compromise any individual. The book's written in that aspect, and again, I do tell readers when I change a name and why that reason is I change the name.
Yes, indeed. How do you respond to critics who might think the book glamorized crime?
I haven't had too much of that. What I would say, if they thought it glamorized crime, I think it's important for society and people who don't commit crimes to read about crimes and criminal acts, whether it's sexual in nature or not, to further protect themselves, because I think it's an eye opener on things that can happen in society. So it kind of clicks in your own head, hey, I got to keep myself safe. Maybe I avoid this situation. So I think books on crime are actually a good thing because it prepares the public for what's out there. I always tell people it's 10% of society that wreaks havoc on the rest, the 90%. And the only person that can really keep you safe is yourself. Police are out there and will certainly come and help, but that takes time. So in that minute where you're in trouble, you got to protect yourself. So keeping yourself out of those situations is key. And I teach my own kids this, right? So I think books on true crime are actually good because it prepares the public for the evil that could exist out there.
Certainly. And Mr. Doug, what are your struggles in writing 50 Shades of True Crime?
Well, I think the biggest struggle is as an author, you're your own promoter, such as this podcast. Nobody else, even if you have a publisher, they're going to do some work. But the only person that's going to do the work is the author for your book. And that means doing book signings, doing podcasts, contacting readers, interacting. Incredibly important. Otherwise, you're not going to sell a lot of books. So if that's your intention, is to get your book out there in the community, you got to work your butt off. There's no other way around it. And it takes a lot of time and effort. But if you want to be an author, a successful author, that's what you have to do.
Indeed. Before we wrap up our discussion, Mr. Doug, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry second season, and book 101 review in the fifth season as well. Comedy 101 is second season. Food 101 in its fifth season too. Geography 101 and Love Letters in third season. Mental Health 101 in my baby podcast. People, Movie 101 review and Music 101 in its fourth season. And Sex 101 and Science 101 in its first season. Please do listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. Mr. Dog, are you planning to continue exploring similar themes in your future book or series?
Yeah, certainly. I think it'll just be future crime books. 50 Shades of Crime, True Crime has been incredibly popular. So I may do a spinoff of that, another book related to those stories, because sex, for whatever reason, it certainly sells, and that's a good thing.
Yes.
So I'll probably have another book on that. I think the next book will be more true crime related. And then, interestingly enough, I was contacted from my initial true crime book by some Hollywood producers who may want to do something like a docu series on it, which was cool to hear, and we'll see how that progresses. But there may be a docu series related to the books in the future, which would be nice.
Mr. Doug Fifer, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge to the world as well as your expertise. Hoping for your 50 Shades of True Crime will be a series on Netflix or whatever streaming platform. So, can you please invite our listeners to support 50 Shades of True Crime?
Yeah, you can check out my website at dougfifer.com. That's just DOUGFIFER.com. You can actually watch the book trailer, which is pretty neat. See if you're interested in it, buy the book, read it. I think you'll love it. And then send me a note. Tell me if you liked it or not.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Douglas Pfeiffer because if you support him, more and more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Mr. Dog, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Moricon people, see you soon.